Good day. So for this session, we are to have the screening and detection of the drugs of abuse, or what we call as the illicit drugs. For the learning objectives, at the end of this lesson, the students are expected to identify the functions of ASC, or Authorized Specimen Collector, determine the different specimens used for screening and detection of illicit drugs, familiarize the validity and collection procedures for urine specimen, determine the analytical methods and principles for the screening and detection of illicit drugs, and lastly, identify the system features and key functions of IDTOMIS. So this one states that proper specimen collection is essential for legally and scientifically defensible drug test result. Failure to follow any of these steps will invalidate the results and make them indefensible in legal settings. So I guess I agree with this one, because this is not only true for drug testing but as well as the other tests the medical technologists conduct in the laboratory. And this specimen collection is actually one of the integral parts of the pre-analytical aspects of the lab, because once this is not done correctly, reliable results cannot be generated and the entire testing process will be deemed erroneous. So it's really important that we have to know and to understand the basic principles of proper specimen collection. So this one comes from the National Reference Laboratory of East Avenue Medical Center. So they are also ISO accredited testing laboratory. So what are the qualifications of authorized specimen collector? So I guess we need first to set the borderline between the functions of the collector and also of the analyst. So this collector cannot perform the work of an analyst, because a collector or an authorized specimen collector for drug testing is only helping or assisting the donor in collecting the specimen for drug testing. He's the one instructing the donor to collect properly the specimen, and he is also the one assisting the donor in filling up the forms for drug testing. So that's for the authorized specimen collector. But when we say a drug analyst, this one, he or she is allowed to conduct a test to the specimen of the donor. So again, a collector must not conduct a test on the specimen of the donor. It's only the analyst that is allowed to conduct drug testing to the specimen of the donor. And anyway, a donor is a person who is intended for drug testing. So what are the qualifications of ASC? So ASC must be at least a high school graduate who undergone training on the following. So collection procedure, chain of custody and record keeping, specimen integrity and security, and dangerous drugs regulations and policies. So the ASC has three general functions. So number one, it's to ensure the security of specimen at a collection site. So this one includes the restriction of unauthorized personnel to enter the collection site. So the ASC must make sure that only one collection at a time is performed. And also, the ASC is the one who verifies the ID of the donor or the client. And of course, the ASC is the one who provides security to specimen supplies, records, and even the documents in the laboratory. And he is also the one informing the donor of the proper collection procedure. And also, most importantly, the ASC is the one who accepts and makes sure that the specimen is sealed and the container is secured, and he will do this one in the presence of the donor or the subject or the client. Next one, to inspect the integrity of urine sample. So the ASC will check the temperature, the physical properties, the volume, and other parameters of the urine specimen. So this specimen submitted by the donor must be tested for validity by the ASC prior to the actual drug testing procedure. This is just to make sure that the specimen was not adulterated or was not tampered by the donor. And lastly, to record the specimen. So it's the ASC who accomplishes the CCF, or the custody and control form. So the CCF, that's steps 1 to 5. And also, When necessary, it's the ASC who will reject the specimen and who will issue an MFR. So this MFR, so this is a record to document the recovery, the corrective and remedial measures to any administrative errors. So it's the ASC who conducts that one. Now, who are not authorized to collect specimen for drug testing? So we have employer of client or patient or donor, crime investigator, complainant, owner or administrator of requesting agency. So even for the medical technologists who are employed in a laboratory, they also undergo drug testing from time to time as part of their physical examination, for example. But for them, they also need to choose a different laboratory for testing. So it is not allowed that the medtechs will be tested by their employer or colleagues in the laboratory. So this is just to make sure that the results are not maneuvered or manipulated. How about this one? The preparation of collection site. So a collection site is a designated area within the laboratory or temporary facility located at a remote site where a donor provides specimen for drug test, and the selection of collection site depends on the type of specimen collected. So for collection site, we have two different types of facility. So it could be a permanent facility or a remote facility. So for permanent facility, this is where the collection of specimen for all mandatory drug testing is done. So like for example, in acquiring a driver's license or for employment purposes. However, for remote facility, so this can be a workplace, a school, a jail, or rehabilitation centers, for example, where random or follow-up drug testing is done. And also for crime scene or post-accident cases. Or even for the persons who are critically ill or disabled who are unable to go to the permanent facility for testing. And also, the drug testing laboratory in a remote facility must secure a permit from BHFS or the Bureau of Health Facilities and Services. So, BHFS. So, they must secure a permit from this office at least 7 working days. So, 7 working days prior to remote collection, except of course for crime scene or post-accident cases. And of course, the secured permit must be kept confidential. And also, for the collection site, it must have a suitable clean surface for handling the specimen and completing a paperwork. Also, a secured temporary storage capability to maintain a specimen until it is tested. It must also have an area to provide donor privacy appropriate to the specimen being collected, a controlled and secured area for supplies and records, a poster or information bulletin with a detailed description of the proper specimen collection process, and of course a source of water for hand washing external to toilet facility and coloring agents. So just remember that inside the toilet there is no water source, just to avoid tampering or adulteration of the specimen. So that water source must be external to the toilet facility. For the collection supplies, we have specimen containers. Of course, it's provided by the laboratory or collection facilities. Tamper evidence seals, such as this one. So this security seal is placed on top of the cover of the specimen cup, and it is signed by the donor or the client in the presence of an authorized specimen collector. For labeling, waterproof pens, also gloves, leak-resistant plastic bags such as this one, coloring agents. So these coloring agents are usually dropped in the toilet or toilet tank, so the water will be colored and it will not be used for specimen adulteration. Thermometer or temperature strip. So this is an example of a temperature strip. So this temperature checking is part of validity testing of urine specimen prior to actual drug testing procedure. And if ever there is discrepancy in temperature or even pH of the specimen, then the specimen is rejected, especially if signs of adulteration were seen in the specimen. Also, documents are needed such as CCF, MFR and other logbooks, and of course, shipping containers or ice chest. Collection devices and types of specimens. So for urine, we have polyethylene bottle with a 30 or 60 ml capacity. It must be wide mouth for easy collection, screw capped in order to avoid leakage of the specimen. For saliva, the bottle must be polyethylene with 30 ml capacity. Blood, plain test tube, 10 ml capacity. Tissue, screw capped, plastic container. Hair, self-sealed, transparent plastic bag. And for sweat, FDA approved sweat patch. So these collection devices shall not affect or alter the specimen collected. And of course, it must be properly labeled and sealed. And if the collection device is unique and an integral part of the collection and analytical testing procedure, it must be registered by an appropriate agency designated by the Department of Health as a medical device, so such as this one, the sweat patch. However, for single-use items, they are not considered as unique collection devices and are not required to be cleared by the Department of Health before usage. So the urine specimen is intended for pre-employment purposes, for random checking, for reasonable suspicion or cause, and usually it's mandatory for other agencies. Just like, for example, again, when we acquire a driver's license. So for the urine specimen, the minimum quantity is 60 ml if it is a single collection. But if we use split specimen, so there must be two separate containers containing 30 ml of urine each container. For saliva, same reason for urine specimen. So it must be 2 ml divided into two parts. So 1.5 ml for the primary test and 0.5 ml for the challenge test. For blood, tissues, and nails, so same reason. So for blood, to be particular, it's 5 ml. For hair, so pre-employment, random check-up, return to duty, or follow-up. So 100 milligrams or equivalent number of strands or 1 centimeter above the scalp. For sweat, return to duty or follow-up. So 1 patch, so it's worn by the donor for 7 to 14 days. And also, you need to take note that more than one type of specimen may be collected at the same time from the same donor. And a specimen may be tested for other purposes provided that the quality of the specimen for which it will be tested is maintained and of course the chain of custody is intact. So among the specimens used for drug testing, urine is considered as the sample of choice because of course it's readily available, it's least expensive, and it's actually the most popular method. It is also easy to do and easy to collect, and there are already standardized procedures for this one, and practically speaking, all drug metabolites are excreted in urine. It can detect the use of drugs within the week, and there are already tests established for specimen validity. However, one of the major drawbacks of urine sample is that abstaining from drugs can produce negative reaction. However, despite of this, the metabolites in the urine can be detected for a longer period as compared to the blood. So those are the pros and cons of urine sample. And also, for the types of specimen collection, as mentioned, we have the single and split specimen collection. So for single specimen collection, the specimen is entirely placed in a single 60 ml bottle. For split, the specimen is collected at the same time but placed in two separate containers with 30 ml each. Next one, saliva specimen. So this is an uncommon method. However, it is easy to administer and there is only a short detection time for drugs. However, reference standards are not yet established as compared to the urine sample. Next, blood specimen. So it's the most expensive method. However, it's the most accurate and it's the least common method. And there is only a short detection time. And also, just like in saliva, the procedure are not established and standardized yet. For sweat or patch specimen, this is an uncommon method, and also there are no reference standards developed yet, but this one requires wearing of patch 1 to 2 weeks. So that's 7 to 14 days. And also, surface contamination of patch can produce false positive result. And it can detect use for extended period of time. And also, we have hair specimen. So this is twice more sensitive than urine test, and it detects chronic substance abuse. And it requires 1.5 by 1.5 cm hair clump, and it's not affected by drug abstinence as compared to your urine, and it can determine temporal pattern or inconsistent pattern of the use of drugs. However, it is expensive and very tedious, and it does not detect recent use. For the methods of specimen collection using urine as a sample, we have observed and unobserved collection. So these pictures here show observed collection of urine sample. So in this case, the ASC must always stand outside the cubicle while the donor provides the specimen. But still, it's case-to-case basis, just like this one. This policeman here serving as an ASC stands just right behind the donor while the donor is collecting the urine sample. But in some laboratory, they have this window wherein the ASC could peek through the toilet so that he can observe the donor while he or she is collecting the urine sample. Also this one. So this shows the working area of the authorized specimen collector and also the toilet where the donor will collect the urine specimen. And also, as mentioned earlier, we use coloring agent and we put that in the toilet or toilet tank in order to avoid tampering or adulteration of the specimen. So that's why the water there is colored blue. So in what conditions when unobserved specimen collection is allowed? So it's allowed when the donor is physically unable to go to the laboratory or designated collection center, if he's involved in a crime scene or post-accident situations, or if the donor is critically ill. So in unobserved collection, this is done in the absence of authorized specimen collector, and the samples are only submitted to the laboratory, but still, it will be subject to validity test. For the validity procedures for unobserved urine collection, there must be an initial validity test followed by confirmatory validity test using other procedures, instruments, and methods on the same sample. So these validity tests are usually performed in order to determine the integrity of the specimen and to make sure that the specimen was not tampered or was not adulterated, and of course, in cases of unobserved urine collection. So the initial validity tests include the following: physical examination of urine, specific gravity, pH, nitrites, creatinine concentration, and of course, the presence of oxidizing adulterants. So those validity procedures are actually part of the specimen integrity and security. And as stated in here, the ASC or authorized specimen collector must adopt procedures to minimize the risk of tampering specimen during the collection procedure. So anyway, what are the ways of tampering specimen? So generally, we have three: dilution, adulteration, and substitution. So when we say a specimen is diluted, that means a specimen has been modified by adding water or other solvents to it in order to lessen the concentration of a particular analyte in a sample. So in this case, we are talking about illicit drugs. So if the urine is diluted with water, then the concentration of those drugs will be decreased or will lessen. So there is a tendency that a false negative reaction will be obtained. Next one, adulteration. So adulteration meaning to say adding something to a specimen. So we can add substances that are not normal constituents of urine or endogenous substances at a concentration that is not its normal physiologic concentration. So that's adulteration. For substitution, meaning to say a specimen was obtained through switching or replacement of the original sample. So those are the ways of tampering the specimen. So one of the major challenges of urine drug testing is adulteration. So again, it's a practice of manipulating a specimen with chemical adulterants to produce false negative results. And actually, this is a problem because there are a lot of chemicals that are easily obtained and can effectively adulterate a urine specimen. And one of the ways in order to adulterate the specimen is doping the sample. So this means contaminating or spiking the samples with chemicals that interfere with the assay. So you could have the bleach, detergents, ammonia, table salt, hydrogen peroxide, and even the Vicin eye drops. So these are the additives and their effects. So for the bleach, it increases the pH and slows the antibody-antigen reaction. For the ammonia, liquid soap, and table salt, all of them increase the pH. For the vinegar, it decreases the pH. And of course, for the Vicin eye drops, it interferes with EMIT, or the enzyme multiplied immunoassay technique. So another way of adulterating the specimen is through drug screens. So that means the donor can take chemicals before the drug test procedures in order to mask or to interfere with the drug analysis. So this includes aspirin, niacin, and zinc sulfate. So another way of tampering the specimen is through dilution. So we have internal and external dilution. So for internal dilution, it involves drinking plenty of water or taking diuretics such as Lasix, tea, coffee, or beer. For external dilution, of course, as mentioned earlier, addition of water to the specimen. And also, another way is through substitution. So like catheterization, using concealed containers or condoms, injection into the bladder, stealing urine of other persons, or acquiring urine from persons not using drugs, or replacing the urine with other substance similar in appearance. As mentioned, validity tests are performed in order to determine the integrity of the specimen and also whenever there is a suspicion that a specimen has been tampered or manipulated. So here are the parameters included. So physical characteristics, the volume, temperature, pH, specific gravity, nitrites, creatinine, and oxidizing agents. So for the physical characteristics, we have the color, the appearance or clarity of urine, and the odor. So for the color, it's in the shade of yellow. For the appearance, it's clear. For odor, it's aromatic. And again, for the volume, for single collection, 60 ml, and for split, 30 ml per bottle. For the temperature, it's within 1 degree Celsius of body temperature, so it's between 32 to 38 degrees Celsius. For the pH, it's 4 to 9. Specific gravity, 1.003 to 1.030. For the nitrites, they are not present in the urine. And for the pH, you will know that the urine is adulterated if it is less than 3 or greater than 11. Substituted if less than 2 or greater than 9. For specific gravity, if it is diluted, of course, it is less than 1.003. So that is already close to the specific gravity of distilled water. Substituted, same with dilution, or it's greater than 1.020. And nitrite, if the value is greater than 500 micrograms per liter, then the specimen is adulterated. For creatinine, it's 20 milligrams per dl or 1,768 micromoles per ml if it is dilution, or substitution for 142 micromoles per liter. And oxidants, its presence indicates adulteration. So this is how the adulterant or adulteration test strips looks like. So normally it contains 7 parameters such as the oxidants, specific gravity, pH, nitrite, glutaraldehyde, and creatinine. So the validity test using these adulterant strips must be performed before performing any drug test on the urine sample, just to verify that the urine is of sufficient quality to perform a drug test, especially in the case of clear urine, and also to verify that the urine has not suffered unusual changes or adulteration designed to falsify urine samples for drug testing. So this one is very easy. It's actually a dip, blot, and read method. So you just have to dip the strips in the urine sample, and then of course you have to pull it out And then you have to blot to remove excess urine and to read the result within a minute usually. And there are a lot of adulteration strips available in the market, and they are already accurate and reliable. So for the reading of this test, so the 7 adulterants in the specimen can be detected by comparing the color on each test pad. So this is the test pad. So you compare the color on a test pad with the corresponding pad on the color chart. So this one is the color chart. So just like this one. So you compare the color on the test pad on the color chart. So one of the parameters for validity test is the nitrite. So here it's indicated the negative and the positive color. So for the nitrite, again, it is not found in normal human urine. However, some adulterants such as the Clear and Wheezy's brand, so they use nitrites to oxidize and destroy the major cannabinoid metabolite in the urine specimen. So that is the tetrahydrocannabinol carboxylic acid. So this is the major cannabinoid metabolite. And also, nitrite levels of up to 3.6 milligrams per DL may indicate UTI, bacterial contamination, or improper storage of urine sample. And as stated in the chart earlier, a nitrite level of greater than 500 micrograms per liter is considered as a specimen which is adulterated. Another one is creatinine. So generally, this creatinine is used as a marker for dilution of urine specimen. Remember, creatinine is a non-protein nitrogenous compound that is removed from the body by the kidneys, which filter almost all of it from the blood and release it to the urine. So if the creatinine level in the urine is decreased, then that could indicate dilution of the specimen when we are talking about drug testing. So again, it's a marker for dilution, and a concentration of less than 20 milligrams per DL or 1,768 micromole per ml. That's the indication of dilution. And we will know also if it is a substitution type of tampering if it's less than 442 micromole per liter. Next one, we also have the oxidants. So it can be in the form of bleach, hydrogen peroxide, or PCC. So this one is pyridinium chlorochromate. So pyridinium chlorochromate. So these oxidants, they can be used as adulterants in order to oxidize and destroy also the major cannabinoid metabolite in the urine sample, producing false negative result. And also, the presence of oxidants in the urine specimen indicates adulteration. So these are the negative reactions, and the moment it deviates to that color, then that means there is a presence of oxidants, and that means the urine is adulterated. So this is an example of the color chart that is usually pasted in the adulteration test strips in which we base our result in the test pad. So this one shows the normal color reaction of the parameters, whereas this one, the abnormal color reactions. And also, let's proceed to the observed specimen collection for urine. So this one is a diagram of the summary of how the workflow in the urine collection for drug testing is done in the laboratory. So this one focuses on the collection of urine specimen. So it starts with the verification of the donor's identification, and the donor and also the collector will fill up the drug testing forms, and then with the help of the ASC, the donor will collect urine sample, and also the collector will seal the specimen in the presence of the donor, and the CCF will be completely filled up, and now the drug analyst is now ready to analyze the specimen as long as the specimen has passed the validity test. So for the verification of the identity of the donor is required to present an ID to the collector before specimen collection and drug tests are conducted, and it must be a valid photo ID containing the pertinent information of the donor, and those ID cards without pictures are not acceptable. So it must be a photo ID. So if it is containing no picture like the credit cards or gift cards, then it is not valid to be used for drug testing. And other laboratories are not even accepting laminated IDs. So just to be sure, it's important to present a government-issued ID like passports, driver's license, SSS, UMID ID, or computerized ID with complete data. And also, we have here unacceptable forms of identification. So identification by a coworker, identification by another donor, or use of a single non-photo IDs. Again, like the credit cards, like the gift cards, voter registration cards, or other information or identification card without photo on it. Now let's proceed to the actual step-by-step procedure of specimen collection. So after the donor's identity has been verified and the basic collection procedure has been discussed to the donor, the collection site must be prepared. So prepare and secure the collection site. And if ever there are any reasonable or appropriate questions for the procedure, it must be thoroughly explained to the donor. So a signage can also be posted as instructions to the donor, such as emptying the pocket before entering the toilet, or instructions to avoid the use of water inside the toilet. And also to avoid adulteration, most of the laboratory don't have water source inside the toilet. So the water source, as what I have mentioned earlier, the water source for hand washing is already placed external to the collection site. And also, a coloring agent can be applied in order to avoid adulteration or tampering of specimen. And next one, verify the donor's identity. And also, in this time, the specimen container is opened in full view of the donor. And also, the container must be labeled legibly and completely. And also, in this time, the step 1 of CCF is completed by the collector. Next one, we have the bodily search. So, instruct the donor to remove all unnecessary outer garments like the hats, jackets, and also to empty his pockets. And also, the collector must check the items that may be used to adulterate the specimen. And also, you have to instruct the donor to wash hands thoroughly because other people tend to hide the substances and adulterants in their nails, just like this one. And next one, pay close attention to collection and observe one collection at a time. So there should only be the donor and the collector in the collecting area. And when unusual behavior is seen, you have to repeat the procedure as the ASC under direct observed collection. Because you have to take note that this step, the specimen collection, is considered as the weakest link of the drug testing program. So let me just emphasize that one. Specimen collection is considered as the weakest link of the drug testing program. So that's why all efforts must be done to make the collection legally, forensically, and technically defensible. So next one, you have to measure the temperature and check the volume. Also inspect the physical characteristics of urine if it shows dilution or any adulteration. And also in this time, you may start filling up the step 2 and step 3 of the CCF. So this is an example of a temperature strip. So it's the green color that must be read. So the green color, you have to read that one. So the green indicator, it means the actual temperature reading. For the blue, just like this one, so that means the indicator is just below the actual temperature. For this one, the tan, so the tan color, the indicator is just above the actual temperature. Remember, the acceptable temperature is 32 to 38 degrees Celsius. And what if there is no color change? So that means the liquid is either below 32 or above 38 degrees Celsius. So which could mean manipulation to the specimen. And also you can use thermometer for checking the temperature of the urine specimen. And next one, you have to inspect again for adulteration or substitution. Next, let the donor affix his or her signature to seal, and another one, once the donor has already signed the seal, then you have to apply the seal over the lead bottle in front of the donor. So you have to close the container and apply the seal over the lead bottle in front of the donor. And next one, affix the signature overlapping the cup and the seal. So just like that one. So you just have to secure that it is sealed properly. Next one, step 12, complete the step 3 of CCF. So in here you can see step 3, collector affixes bottle seals to bottles, collector dates the seals, and then donor initial seals, and donor completes step 5 on copy 2. So there are instructions there, so you have to complete that one. And also, next one, let the donor fill up and sign the step 5 of CCF. So that's how you're going to instruct the donor from the time you have to identify his or her identity up to the time he finished the collection of urine specimen. Now, how about for the specimen integrity and security? So aside from the validity procedures and tests performed by the laboratory before the actual drug testing procedure, the laboratory must also provide an outline regarding the chain of custody procedures during accessioning or receiving, aliquoting, initial and confirmatory testing, and also disposition of specimens. So when we say chain of custody, the laboratory must provide a procedure to account for the integrity of each specimen or aliquot by tracking it from point of specimen collection to its final disposition. So if we put this in a legal aspect, so in criminal and civil law, the term chain of custody refers to the order in which items of evidence have been handled during the investigation of a case. So proving that an item has been handled properly through an unbroken chain of custody is required for it to be legally considered as evidence in court. So that's what we call as the chain of custody. And for the chain of custody, we have here the CCF. So this is a custody and control form. So this form is used to document the security of specimen, the steps in the collection, the persons who handle the specimen, the status and integrity of the specimen, and other pertinent information. So in short, this form is used to document the chain of custody from the collection to transport, analysis, and releasing of reports. And improper entries on this form will invalidate the testing procedure because this one has legal and forensic implications also. And also, 3 copies must be reproduced by the laboratory. So 1 for the donor or employer, 1 for the authorized specimen collector, and 1 for the laboratory. And these are the different steps included in CCF. So for steps 1 to 3, it's for the collection site for the authorized specimen collector. Step 4, lab entry. So for the laboratory or for the ASC. Step 5, donor signature in the collection site. Step 6, screening laboratory report. Step 7, confirmatory test report. And step 8, report at NRL level. So those are the things included in CCF. And also, these are the data entries in CCF. So it contains the donor's info like the name, age, the sex, the address of the donor, and the names and the signature of persons handling the specimen, the status of the specimen like the validity results like the temperature, physical appearance, and other remarks, and also the drug test requested and the result of test. So if it is a screening, confirmatory, or challenge test. And lastly, we also have the Memorandum for Record or the MFR. So this is a record to document the recovery, corrective, and remedial measures to administrative errors. So this one is accomplished by authorized specimen collector and other lab personnel. And the recovery of errors not documented by an MFR shall be rejected or cancelled. So that's how important the MFR is. Now for CCF and specimen security. So if you are an ASC or authorized specimen collector, just make sure that the code and signature in the specimen bottle must match with the CCF. So for the specimen handling and storage, so we all know that specimens must be properly handled and stored to ensure the integrity of a drug or its metabolites. And also, the specimen must be properly labeled and also sealed. And in addition to that, during transport, the specimen must be placed in a cooler with dry ice or a suitable alternative so its integrity is still maintained during transport. And also this one, conditions for retention of specimen. So it's 5 days if the results are negative, minimum of 15 days for positive results or for results which are adulterated, substituted, or invalid, and up to a year for judicial proceedings or upon request from the court. How about for specimen transport? So for specimen transport, it is a must to document the date and the purpose on CCF each time a specimen is handled or transferred. And again, during collection, minimize the number of personnel handling the specimen. And also for number 2, identify each person who handled the specimen. And when courier services are utilized, for example, the time of receipt, so the time of receipt from the time the specimen is collected at the collection site and the time of the delivery to the laboratory, so it must be documented on the CCF. So from the time the specimen is received on the collection site up to it is delivered in the laboratory, so all of that again must be documented on the CCF. Next one, place the specimen in heat-sealed transparent plastic bag and an appropriate transport container. So this transport media or transport materials are designed to minimize damage, and also you have to seal them securely to eliminate the possibilities of tampering. Number 4, ensure that the CCF accompanies the appropriate specimen transport container and also match the code, the signature, and any pertinent information on the specimen and on the CCF. And then specimen may be mailed or delivered to the testing laboratory, so the transport of samples shall be accomplished while maintaining adequate specimen validity. Now let us have the reasons for specimen rejection and cancellation of test. So all rejected specimens should be reported to the head of the laboratory stating the reason or reasons of rejection. So these are the criteria for specimen rejection that are non-correctable. So incompatibility of the code on the specimen with the code of the CCF. So I have emphasized this earlier that if you are an authorized specimen collector, you have to make sure that the code on the specimen bottle matches with the code on the CCF. And also the absence of code on the specimen, no printed name and signature of ASC on the CCF, broken or tampered seal on the specimen container, and insufficient quantity of the specimen. Again, it's 60 ml for single collection and 230 ml bottles for split collections. Next, criteria for specimen rejection that are correctable. So administrative flaws, failure of the ASC to sign CCF, failure to record the specimen temperature and appropriate remarks, incomplete entries, discrepancies in CCF, the technical flaws, incomplete entries in electronic report, and entries in CCF that can be corrected by MFR. So these are the appropriate remedial measures. For correctable conditions, there will be no rejection or cancellations of tests. So this again may be because of administrative flaws or remedial measures with MFR. For non-correctable conditions, so there will be no remedial measures. So the test is rejected either by ASC or analyst, or the test is cancelled by the head of the laboratory. Now let us have the analytical methods for drug testing. So what are the drugs that are commonly detected in the laboratories? So we have the marijuana, cocaine, amphetamine, opiates, and PCP or phencyclidine. And other than that, we also have the methamphetamine, benzodiazepines, barbiturates, oxycodone, and ecstasy. And for the specimens, we also have blood, fingernails, hair, saliva, sweat, tissue, and most importantly, most of the time, urine is used as a specimen of choice for drug testing. For the screening phase, we have here the screening drug testing laboratory. So this is a laboratory that performs a validated test to differentiate negative specimen from a specimen that requires further testing for drug or its metabolites. So what are the screening analytical techniques? So we have the following methods. So it could be a registered testing kits approved by the FDA, DOH, using immunoassay techniques. And also we have instrumented screening methods such as ELISA or the enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. We also have the FPIA or the fluorescence polarization immunoassay. We have the TLC or the thin layer chromatography, and HPLC, the high performance liquid chromatography. So for the immunoassay, we have here the RIA, the enzyme immunoassay, fluoroimmunoassay, chemiluminescent immunoassay, and the LAI as well. Next one, for chromatography technique, we have the planar chromatography, again thin layer chromatography, liquid chromatography, the high performance liquid chromatography, and we also have the gas chromatography. We have the FID. So this is flame ionization detector. And of course, we also have the NPD. So this is nitrogen phosphorus detector. So for the registered kits, we have here the DTK. So this drug testing kit is oftentimes used in the screening method. So it has this principle of competitive binding immunoassay. So this method employs unique mixture of monoclonal and polyclonal antibodies to selectively identify the drugs of abuse and their metabolites in the test samples, and it has a high degree of sensitivity. So this one shows the typical layout of a lateral flow test strip. So this is the sample pad where we place our sample, the conjugate pad, the membrane, also the test line, the control line, the adhesive backing, and also the adsorbent pad. So I just want to emphasize the control line here because regardless of the drug levels or concentration of the drugs in the sample, there is always a band that must be produced in the control line. So usually it's rose pink color band. And this color band in the control line serves as a built-in quality control measures by demonstrating antibody recognition. So that verifies that the reagents are chemically active. So in short, if there is no band in the control line, then the test is invalid or we need to use another kit. So for the principle of the test, we have competitive binding immunoassay. So competitive because in this test or in this test principle, the drug and the drug metabolites in the urine specimen will compete with the immobilized drug conjugate for the limited labeled antibody binding site found in the conjugate pad. So if I will to zoom this out, so again, the drug and its metabolites, if present in the sample pad, so again in the specimen, it will compete with the immobilized drug present in the T line. So both the drugs and the immobilized drug will compete for the binding site of this labeled antibody. So this shows the binding site of the labeled antibody. So the drugs present in the urine and the immobilized drug present in this T line will compete for that limited antibody binding site. So what will happen if the specimen contains drugs of abuse or the concentration of drugs is above the cutoff limit? So what will happen is that these analytes, these drugs, will bind or will occupy the binding site of the labeled antibody. And once they occupied the limited binding site of the antibody, they will continue to migrate along the porous membrane until such time they will reach the T line. And because the binding site is already occupied by the analyte, by the drugs, so what will happen is that the immobilized drug here can no longer bind to the binding site of the labeled antibody. So what will happen is a rose pink colored band is prevented from forming. So there will be no colored band formation. So if there is no band formation, that indicates a positive drug test result. So that's the principle. How about if there is no drug or metabolites present in the specimen, or if the concentration of the drug and its metabolite is below the detection limit? So in this case, as what you can see, there is no drug or metabolites present here. So we can see here now the labeled antibody binding or occupied by the immobilized drug. So the immobilized drug here has occupied the binding site of this labeled antibody. And because of that, a colored band is formed. So there is band formation. So in this case, this denotes a negative drug test result. So to explain it further, let's have another illustration. So again, as what I have said, the principle is competitive binding immunoassay because the drug present in the sample will compete with the immobilized drug present in the test line. So this green one is the immobilized drug. The red one here is the drug and the metabolites found in the specimen. And also in the conjugate pad, there is this what we call as the labeled antibody. So once the drug is present in the specimen or the metabolites of the drug is above the detection limit, what will happen is it will bind to the limited binding site of the labeled antibody. So once it reaches this test area, the labeled antibody will no longer be occupied by the immobilized drug. So there will be no band formation. So this no band formation indicates what type of result. So this is a positive result. Now how about if there is no drug present in the specimen or the concentration of the drug is below the detection limit? So again, there is no drug present in here, but again, in the T line or the T zone, we can still see the immobilized drug. So there is still this immobilized drug there, and also in the conjugate pad, we still have this labeled antibody. And because we don't have drugs here, the antibody binding site of this labeled antibody will be free. So as it migrates toward the T zone, what will happen is this binding site will be occupied by the immobilized drug. So there will be a formation of rose pink band. So this will be a negative drug test result. So as what you can see, drug testing is counterintuitive from other tests, especially the pregnancy test, because a drug test is positive if there is no line on the test band, as opposed to a line indicating a positive pregnancy test. However, you also have to take note that there always needs to be a control line. So this one. So there should always be a control line indicated here, usually with letter C. And without this control line, the test is not working and thus it's invalid. And a drug test is negative no matter how strong or faint the line is. That's also the thing that you have to remember. Next one, for products design, we have kits and instrumented. So this one is commonly used. So we have pipette and read, the dot method, dip and read, and then the cup principle. So for instrumented, we have immunosensor technology. So this is an example of pipette and read or dot method. So this is easy to perform because you just have to pipette the specimen and drop that one in the sample well, and after that, read the result after a matter of minutes. So depending on the kit that you are using. So each kit contains a product insert wherein you are going to base the procedure and also the do's and don'ts when using the kit. This one is also pipette and read. So the three kits here are considered as valid tests because they contain a control line. However, this one, it does not have a control line, so it's invalid. And again, no matter how faint the line is, the drug test result is considered negative if it contains a line. So again, if it doesn't have a line, then it is considered as a positive result. This one is also pipette and read, but this one is a single kit. This one is for multiple tests. Also this one, that's the procedure of using that kit. and also this one. This one for multiple tests also. Next one, we have dip and read. So as opposed to pipette and read, you don't need a pipette. You just have to dip the kit on the specimen, and after that, after a matter of minutes, then you also have to read the result of the drug test. So just like this one. Also this one, dip and read method. This is for multiple tests. So you can see here that no matter how faint the line is, it's considered as negative, and also invalid if it doesn't have a control. Next one, the cup principle. This uses like a special cup wherein there is already this indicator for the validity test and also for other parameters for drug testing and also for the actual testing of the drug metabolites in the specimen. So these are the parts. So we have the cup, okay, the testing chamber, and also the peel-off label, and this one, the temperature strip label. So what you're going to do is you just have to peel off that piece of paper in order to see this testing area. So the result still, or the interpretation of result will still be the same. So this one again, this is valid because they have a control line. This is invalid because it doesn't have control line. Same with this one. No matter how faint it is, it will be considered as a negative result. Without line, it's positive. So also this one. Also this one. So intensity of the color line is not a factor, and even a faint line indicates a negative result. Also this one. This is an invalid kit, and also this one. Okay, this one. So the intensity of the color line is not a factor. Again, even if there is a faint line, it should be considered as a positive result. So how do we interpret this result? So all of these are negative for drug tests. So this one. So in this area, we have 3 drugs tested. So as what you can see, there is a control line. And in the first line, it's for amphetamine. For the second line, for cocaine. For the third line, for THC, for tetrahydrocannabinol. So all of that numbers contain a line. So that means they are negative for that drugs. Also this one. So these are the drugs. For this one, also negative because it has these lines. And for this one, it doesn't mean that it's positive for the third drug because there are only 2 drugs used here. So it's negative for this drug and this drug. And also it's valid because it has a control line. So in this case, only 1 drug is tested and they're also negative. This one also shows the result of drug testing. So how do you interpret this one? So this is a valid test because there is a control line. It's negative for the first drug and the second drug, but it's positive for tetrahydrocannabinol. So this one. In this case, it's negative for drug 1 and 2, but it's positive for drug 2. Okay, for this one, this shows the cutoffs and windows of detection for these drugs of abuse. So we have marijuana, cocaine, opiates, amphetamine, PCP, methamphetamine, and benzodiazepines. So we have the window of detection, particularly in urine sample. Also, the results cut off for the initial screen and for confirmatory result. So what are the requirements for cases with positive screened results? So for documentary requirements, we have letter request for confirmation, copy of CCF, initial laboratory result, and MFR if applicable. Also for sample specimen, bottle A for confirmatory drug testing laboratory, bottle B, it is stored if split collection, or all specimen if single collection, and a minimum of 55 ml or 25 ml previously kept in appropriate conditions, and also resealed bottle with appropriate markings. Next is the confirmatory test. So this confirmatory test is also a procedure in order to identify illicit drugs or its metabolites. However, this is independent from the initial test, and this also uses different techniques and principles from that of the initial test in order to ensure reliability and accuracy of the test. Next one, for the confirmatory test, we have the GCMS as the gold standard for drug of abuse confirmation. So this is gas chromatography mass spectrometry. So this gas chromatography mass spectrometry is an instrumental technique that produces, separates, and detects ions in the gas phase. And actually, this GCMS can detect trace amount of chemicals as small as 1 picogram. So, in order to have a clear representation of this minute amount, this 1 picogram, so imagine a drop of detergent in water enough to fill a 10-mile long railroad tank car. So that's how small or minute 1 picogram is. And also, this GCMS is generally used to detect volatile and semi-volatile compounds, but also it can be used to analyze solid, gaseous, and liquid sample. Now this one further illustrates the GC and MS technique. So as what you can see in the GC, the main principle involved is partition or partitioning. So in this picture, for example, the red molecules are more soluble and less volatile as compared to the green one. So that means the red molecules have the tendency to stay or to have a high affinity in this stationary phase. So the green one will be the one to be transferred to the MS part of the instrument. So it's the difference in the affinity of the components or the molecules to the stationary phase that causes the separation. So that's for GC. Now for MS. So once the molecule reaches the MS, so the inlet here, so the inlet will transfer the sample into the vacuum of the mass spectrometer. And in the source region, the neutral sample molecules are ionized and then accelerated into the mass analyzer. So this mass analyzer is considered as the heart of the mass spectrometer because this separates the ions according to their mass to charge ratio. And of course, after the ions are separated, they are detected and the signal is transferred to a data system for analysis. And also notice this one. So all spectrometers have a vacuum system to maintain a low pressure. So this is also called a high vacuum. So this is required for operation. And also this high vacuum minimizes the ion molecule reactions, the scattering, and neutralization of ions. And also this one, it shows the GCMS, so which is the gold standard for drug of abuse confirmation. So the qualitative analysis of drug testing is based on the following parameters. So number one, it's RRT, or the relative retention time of analyte on ion chromatograph. So this RRT is a measure of the time taken for a solute to pass through a chromatography solution. So it is calculated as the time from the injection to detection of the analyte. And also the presence of 3 diagnostic fragmentation ions and the fragmentation ions with unique MZ ratio. So the mass spectrum is expressed in units of M over Z. So the M here stands for mass and the Z stands for charge number of ions. Remember, the mass analyzer of the mass spectrometer separates the ions into its mass and charge ratio. So speaking of qualitative analysis, a mass spectrum will usually be presented as a vertical bar graph, just like this one. So in this case, each bar represents an ion having a specific mass to charge ratio, or what we call as the MZ ratio. And the length of the bar, this one, so this indicates the abundance of the ion, the relative abundance of the ion. And the most intense ion is assigned an abundance of 100. And this is referred to as the base peak. And since most of the ions formed in a mass spectrometer have a single charge, the MZ value is still equivalent to mass itself. And also, we are lucky because modern mass spectrometers can already distinguish or resolve ions differing by only a single atomic mass unit. And so they can provide accurate values for the molecular mass of a compound. And also, the highest mass ion in a spectrum is normally considered to be the molecular ion. So molecular ion, if this is having a highest mass ion. However, the lower mass ions are considered as the fragments from the molecular ion, assuming that the sample is a single pure compound. Another one, these are the RT of the different drugs. So this number corresponds to its peak here. So the following diagram displays the mass spectra of three simple gaseous compounds, particularly the carbon dioxide, the propane, and cyclopropane. But for the sake of this discussion, I will just take carbon dioxide as the example, since the molecule of carbon dioxide is composed only of 3 atoms. Its mass spectrum is very simple. So it has 1 carbon and 2 oxygen. So just like this one. So in this case, the molecular ion, so this one, so this is the molecular ion. So this is also the base peak. So it has an MZ ratio of 44, and the only fragment ions are this one, the CO, so it has 28 MZ, and this one 16. So that's why you can see here that the highest peak is the molecular ion with an MZ of 44, and also the fragment ions 28 and 16. So this one shows the spectrum of 2-methyl-imidazole, which is a precursor to a range of drugs. So we can notice here that the peak corresponds to the molecular ion. So its MZ is 81.48. So just take note that the molecular peak or the parent peak corresponds to the molecular ion in pure compounds. So in short, this is the one that has the largest, easily identifiable MZ ratio. And the existence also of the molecular ion in the spectrum allows accurate determination of molecular mass. However, in certain compounds, the molecular ion is not present because it is very unstable and the molecular mass cannot be determined. But then, I'm not telling you that you have to memorize every structure that you can see here. I'm just showing you how the data are presented to show the MZ ratio of the molecules. And also, during these days, a lot of facilities are already using automated systems, so the results are electronically generated, so we don't need to compute for it manually. Now, let's take a look at this sample RRT calculation worksheet. But before that, let's differentiate what is an RT and RRT. So when we say RT, this refers to the retention time, which is again the measure of time taken for a solute to pass through a chromatography column. So it is calculated as the time from injection to detection. And also, you have to take note that the retention time for a compound is not fixed because there are a lot of factors that can influence even if the same gas chromatography and columns are used. And these factors can make it difficult to compare the retention times of the substances. Even if you use the same GC just a few days apart, there can be small differences in the retention time of a compound. And so the RRT is developed. So this RRT is the relative retention time. So this is an expression of a sample's retention time relative to the standard's retention time. So you're comparing the retention time of the sample to the retention time of an internal standard. So the formula is the standard retention time over the sample retention time. So that's for RRT. So just like this one, so the retention time of an internal standard is 8.7. But the RRT of which for the lower limit it's 8.6 and for the upper limit it's 8.8. So When the samples are analyzed, so we have sample 1, 2, and 3. The RT here of sample 1 and sample 2 can be compared to the RT of the internal standard. And also the RT falls on the upper and lower limit. So this means this is passed. So meaning to say you can report a positive drug test result in this specimen. However, for this sample, the RT is outside of the upper and lower limit. So it fails the relative retention time. So we need to re-extract a sample and we can't release a positive test for drug test. So that's for RRT calculation. So this illustration here shows the different retention times for the different analytes. So as what I have mentioned, in qualitative analysis, usually it relies on comparing the retention times of the peaks in an unknown sample with those of the known standards. And if the retention time of a peak in an unknown sample is the same as the standard, then positive identification can be made. So just like this one. So this shows the results from 3 GC runs. So the standard and the sample X. So here's the standard, here's the sample X. So they were run consecutively. However, for the sample Y, this one, it was run a few days later. So from the retention time that we can observe here, we can state quite reasonably that sample X, so this one, so it's 1.44. So the sample X contains components A and B. So this is component A, this is component B. So for the standard, it's 1.45 and 3.07. For sample X, it's 1.44 and 3.06. So they are comparable. So the sample X is comparable to the standard. So a positive identification can be made in the sample, so the sample X. However, no positive identification could be made for sample Y, based of course on a comparison of the retention time. It's only 1.39 and this one 2.96. So again, one method to reduce the uncertainty due to RT variation is to use the RRT. So with RRT, an internal standard is added to the sample and the retention time of each analyte is compared with the internal standard's retention time. So again, the RRT is equal to the retention time of the standard over the retention time of the sample. So using the previous data, we have here the standard. So this is the internal standard. Also, we have the sample X and the sample Y, just like before. So to compute, so from the data here, we can calculate the RRT of the peaks in X and Y. So for the RRT of the standard, we have 2.9. So that's for the internal standard, divided by 1.45. So this one. So 1.45. So that gives us 2.0. For sample X, so it's 2.89. So for the internal standard, divided by 1.44. So that's for the RT of this sample X. So next one, it gives us 2.01. Next one, we have the RT of the standard. For sample Y, it's 2.78 divided by 1.39. So it gives us an RRT of 2.0. So taking a look at these three, we can see now that the RRT of the sample X and sample Y are close to the RRT of the standard. So positive identification can be made in sample X and sample Y. Also, in this case, we have 0.94 for the standard, 0.94 for sample X, and 0.94 for sample Y. So positive identification can also be made in this case. So also in this case, positive identification can be made because the RT of the analyte is comparable to the RT of the internal standard. So this is the internal standard, this one is the analyte. Same with this one, this is for the analyte, and this one for the internal standard. That's why we can make positive identification in here. And also for qualitative and quantitative analysis, confirmatory analysis using only qualitative method with retention time and diagnostic ions is very risky, particularly if it involves forensic and workplace drug testing. So you can insist on your CDTL or confirmatory drug testing laboratory for qualitative and quantitative analysis profile of your specimen. And for the retest and challenge test, retest is a replicate test to check the initial test results of the same sample within the laboratory or referral system, provided proper protocol is being followed. For the challenge test, it is a replicate test conducted to same sample when confirmatory results is legally questioned. So that's the difference between retest and challenge test. So let us have the IDTOMIS or the Integrated Drug Test Operations Management Information System. So this one, the IDTOMIS, this is an ICT or what we call as the Information and Communication Technology Infrastructure established by the government to provide a standard and effective system for conducting drug tests and ensuring quality in the operation of drug testing laboratories and drug abuse treatment and rehabilitation centers. So it was in 2001 when the LTO, so the Land Transportation Office, issued a memorandum circular that required all accredited drug test laboratories to connect online with the LTO information technology system. And also in 2002, the RA 9165 or the Comprehensive Dangerous Drug Act of 2002 impelled the DOH to protect the health of the public, particularly through the regulation of drug testing centers operation. So the same issuance specifically prescribes mandatory drug test for applicants of driver's license. And because of this, the DOH developed the DTOMIS. So it's just DTOMIS during that time. So the DOH developed the DTOMIS software for drug testing laboratories to use and connect to the DOH. And also, the DOH was tasked to license, to accredit, and to monitor the drug testing laboratories to safeguard the quality of drug test results. And it was in September 27, 2003 that the information management system of the DOH developed the system, so the interim or the temporary drug test operations and management information system. So that's the DTOMIS that replaced the automated system being used by the drug testing laboratories, because before the drug testing laboratories were using already an automated system that enabled them to enter the drug test results, generate the drug test reports, and send data to a central database storage. And during this time, the DOH was given 1 month, so only 1 month, to develop a solution that replaced the automated system being used by the drug testing laboratories. So this IDTOMIS was developed. So what are the system features of IDTOMIS? So number one, it's web-enabled. So the client verification system is web-enabled that allows the drug testing laboratories to verify pending transactions. And it is also accessible to the DTLs and agency data beneficiaries from internet-capable terminal anytime and of course anywhere. Another one, it's user-friendly. So the users can navigate easily through the system functions and facility. And also, it is secured because there are built-in validation, verification, and security of data or information. So it has an audit trail that monitors users who have entered, edited, and deleted the data. And also, there's compliance with the standards. So the system procedures, the inputs and output requirements are compliant with the requirements of the DOH. For monitoring of the facility, so this one, it monitors the number and the status of transactions and the number of drug test kits that are consumed. For report generation, this one, it provides the reports needed by the DTLs and of course the DOH. And lastly, ease of maintenance. So the software and operation systems are easy to maintain. And also, the IDTOMIS allows real-time data uploading to the DOH central database via internet connection. So aside from the CCF number, which is a unique numbering system that identifies a transaction or a client's drug test, this IDTOMIS also uses biometric devices and software to capture, to store, to retrieve, and match biometric images of the donor. And of course, the use of biometric technology to confirm each time there is a transaction. But of course, in order to access the portal of IDTOMIS, you must be registered by the facility owner during accreditation to gain access to the system. And of course, the central evaluator must tag you as an active in the system. So this is a sample result generated by IDTOMIS. So it shows what metabolites are tested, and of course the analyst, and of course the head of the laboratory, and the pertinent data of the patient or the donor. Now let us have the general flow of drug of abuse testing. So if there is a request for drug test, and if the test is to be conducted in a permanent facility, then the donor is to be referred for observed collection. But if not, refer to laboratory policy for unobserved collection. And also, if the drug test is to be performed in a remote collection or a remote collection area or facility, then a permit must be secured from BHFS, or it's the Bureau of Health Facilities and Services. And also, if the permit is secured, then observed collection can be done to the donor. So after determining the collection procedure, the client must be verified. And if there are no pending transactions for this particular client, then he can proceed to payment, can secure a consent, and of course, medical history can be conducted to him. However, if he has pending result, then he will be rejected and no drug test will be conducted to him. So if the client has been verified, he can now proceed to specimen collection. And also documentation and inspection of specimen must be done. And the condition of the specimen must be also noted. So is it acceptable or not? So if not, proceed to validity test. And if it is valid, then proceed to proper and acceptable documentation steps. But if it is not valid, proceed to this step. Meaning to say, it is not acceptable, but you have to check if it is correctable or not. So if it is correctable, then prepare MFR, then proceed to the next step. But if it is not correctable, then no test will be performed, but MFR must be prepared. Next one, if the specimen is already acceptable, then initial screening test must be done to the specimen, and if the result is negative, you can release that result to the client immediately. However, if it is positive, then you have to prepare the documents for confirmatory testing. So you have to submit the specimen and the documents to the confirmatory drug testing laboratories. And once it arrives in the CDTL, so they will document and inspect the specimen and assess if it is acceptable or not. So if it is not acceptable, they will return the specimen to SDTL for correction if correctable, but if not, the sample is rejected. And if the specimen upon inspection is acceptable, then it will proceed to payment. Then the test will be conducted to the specimen, and once the result is available, it will be released to the SDTL, and it will be the SDTL who will release the result to the client. So that ends my discussion. I hope you learned something. Thank you so much.